Well, look, I will say my parents gave us very strong foundations. So obviously, as a child, you don't know that you live in this segregated country. Well, one of the things I always encourage my clients to do is to take it one step at a time. Because what
Mm.
I've seen in life is that sometimes when we go through a huge challenge, we feel like we need to fix everything all at once.
There's a great saying by Tony Robbins that says we always over anticipate or overstate what we'll achieve in 12 months and understate
Yes.
what we'll achieve in 10 years.
All the important keywords that you need is in that job description.
Mm.
Use it, weave it throughout your resume,
Right.
but make your resume compelling in terms of use active language,
Yes.
right? Language that's pacey and active.
Hello, team. Welcome to today's episode. I have a feeling that this may be a very popular conversation given the amount of movement that we're seeing in the workplace at the moment. And during our conversation, we're going to dive into career transitions as well as look at a little bit around the evolution of the workforce itself. We'll explore what I feel is an interesting observation, mainly due to my age, that our guest has made, which she terms silver tsunami. So we're going to talk about that. Our discussion will also cover expert strategies, of course, looking at how you craft a standout resume, how you leverage LinkedIn, make impactful impressions during interviews, and even for those fortunate to get the employment green light, I'm hoping we're going to have the opportunity to talk about that crucial period, those first few months in starting the new role. So there's a whole host of things that I'm really looking forward to talking about. I'm hoping we have that opportunity. You will have heard me introduce our guest during the intro, career coach and expert, Miss Wendy Alexander. Team, I would suggest now is a really great time to get yourself ready, get a notebook, a pen, and be ready to take down some valuable insights about your own career aspirations and thriving in today's diverse workplace. So, with that said, Wendy, welcome to the ET Project.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me, Wayne.
Now, Wendy, you're sitting in Melbourne, Australia. So, for
I
those
am.
that follow this podcast, they know I'm Australian. I come from the northeastern state, so not that southern state called Victoria. How is everything down there at the moment? Still four seasons in one day?
Oh, absolutely. Today we have a warm one, but it started out quite cloudy. But yes, as I mentioned to you, there's been rain, there's been heat. The only thing benefiting from this combination of four seasons in one day is my garden. My garden is just blooming.
They loves it, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
When we first met, I know you said you've been based in Melbourne for a reasonable length of time, actually. Um,
correct.
I'm wondering, do you call it home now? Because you're not originally
Oh, absolutely.
right. Where do
Yeah,
you
so
hail from?
okay, so I hail from Cape Town in South Africa, and I left Cape Town uh, a few months shy of my 21st birthday. So I am more Aussie now than I am South African. I've been in Australia longer than I've lived in Cape Town. So Australia's home, absolutely. My parents are here and my siblings are here. So my immediate family's here. I still have cousins and an uncle left in Cape Town, but yeah, the family's here, the immediate family's here. So Melbourne's home.
I have a similar experience. I'm older than you, but I've been based out of Shanghai for the last 20 years. So for me, this is home. I still get to come back to Australia every once in a while. They haven't locked the gates on me, but I'm cautious about that. You never know what's around the corner. I
That's
wonder if
right.
you could walk us through the experiences and the challenge that have brought you to where you are today in terms of being a career coach. So what's the journey been
Okay.
like?
So the journey into career coaching actually started out of my own challenge over 28 years ago.
Mm.
I was in a relationship which ended badly, and I was pregnant at the time. And so
Wow.
as I came out of that, there was a financial mess because he walked away from all responsibility and the house was sold at a loss, and I was left with the debt, so to speak. I was left with holding the baby, both
Yeah.
the baby growing in the belly and the financial baby. And so once I gave birth to my daughter, I, did an evaluation and I was like, I have to start over, and I don't know how to do this. But at the time, I was only driven by one thing, and it was I need to make more money. I have a daughter to support, I have debt to pay off from this house, and I need to make more money. What I'm earning annually is not enough. And so I identified my sum that I needed. I started to play around with my resume, but I didn't really have the steps on how I went forward. And
Mm.
so I actually approached some hiring people in the company I was working for, approached some of the HR people, but I also was looking at going out and contracting because I heard that contractors make more money.
Right.
And so I ended up talking to recruiters. I just rang them and I started to pick these people's brains. I had regular coffees with numerous hiring people and numerous recruiters, and I would just say, how do I get better? How do I position myself to be able to earn more money? Which roles pay better? All of these kinds of things. So it was an experiment
Yeah.
that probably lasted for about 6 months. Um, and so it was a matter of refining the resume all the time, talking to the recruiters, testing it out in the market, getting some interviews. And one of the ones that was going to pay me the kind of money that I needed, um, I landed the interview. I did not get the job offer. So I went back to the drawing board, went back to the recruiters and said, this is the feedback. And I did manage to get feedback because sometimes you don't get feedback from
Yes.
people.
Yes.
And so I got feedback and they said, oh, you just needed to be stronger in these areas in your interview. So then I practiced with people, and then went back out to market again. And I landed another interview. And this time I got the job. And the income that I was going to get was double what I needed. And I thought, well, okay, something's great here. So I had, I suppose, a framework that worked for me, and went on into this role. And then the people around me, mostly the family, the friends, and the colleagues, saw that I jumped quite significantly. And so they came and started asking me for help. And that is, in fact, how the business was born. I started to help other people do what I did. And at the same time, I never stopped talking to recruiters and hiring people because I was always trying to refine and learn and get better and also learn how to negotiate when I was in the jobs, um, asking for things that I needed. Like at the time, I needed support as a single mum. So when I would interview with these companies, I would say to them, well, how do you support single parents?
Yeah.
And I was quite forthright because I said, I'm interviewing you as much as you're interviewing me. And if I can't get the support as a single parent, then this is not the role for me. So sometimes you have to be quite upfront.
Yeah.
But I found that actually worked. I found being upfront, asking directly for what I needed actually worked. But there is a caveat with that. And the caveat is that you have to perform.
Yeah.
Once you get what you want, you need to demonstrate to the hiring people that you can perform, that you can deliver. And I knew that right off the bat. In fact, some recruiters gave me that advice. They said, now you've got to deliver quickly so that they trust you.
Mm.
Because once they trust you, they then give you all kinds of things. So I was working from home,
Right.
27 years ago when it wasn't fashionable, because
Yes.
that's what I negotiated, right? I asked for that. I negotiated. I was very clear in what I needed as support as a single mom. And those are the frameworks I started to put in place and share with other people, show them exactly what I'd done. And other people started getting similar success, doubling their income or
Mm.
any of those kind of things, and being able to negotiate for the perks and the pay that they wanted. And so the business was accidentally born. The
Right.
career coaching business was an accidentally born business, but I did it as a side business for 20 something, probably 20 years, alongside the corporate business. So I was a single mom, had the side gig and the corporate job. So busy woman,
Yes.
but it was the way I liked it. um, and then when midlife came for me, which comes with all those female challenges, the body changes, all of that, I found that I wasn't as happy in corporate anymore.
Mhm.
And so I ended up leaving corporate and took my coaching business full time. So I've been 5 years full time in the coaching business.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the journey. It was dictated by life and some of its changes and some of its challenges that made me go down the paths I went down.
I love listening to people's backstory. It without fail, there's always something new. What I picked up a couple of things that you mentioned early in that conversation then was you were very intentional about the job you were looking for. So
Yeah.
what we experience a lot at the moment is people apply for 10 jobs, 20 jobs, 30 jobs in the hope that they land something.
Yeah.
It sounded like you took a different approach. You did your research, you did your preparation, which we'll talk more about, and you were then very intentional about the jobs that you actually sought out. And I think that's such a great takeaway as an opening for anyone listening that's
Yes.
thinking about applying for a job at the moment. Um, my own experience is when I see people come requesting a job, it's so obvious if my business is just one of many that they're trying to get their foot in the door with, versus somebody
Yes.
who is genuinely interested in this business. I don't know
Yes.
what you.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And look, this is one of the things, one of the foundational pieces that I do with every client who comes to work with me is I take them through a process called mining your story. And I actually still do that on myself. I
Mm,
started that process, that framework many years ago. And I have this ritual between Christmas, so Boxing Day to New Year's Day. I spend those few days going through that process myself because what I know is that every year certain goals change, or I've accomplished certain goals from the year before, and I want to try out something different. So I take myself through this foundational piece, and the mining your story is all about looking at the patterns in your life that inform you about the things that bring you joy, that come naturally to you,
mm,
that you could literally do in your sleep because you're so skilled at it, that you don't necessarily think is a great skill because it's an automatic skill for you, but
right.
that you could, if you package it up, becomes very valuable to someone else, right? So I do that. I look at all that I've overcome because within what you overcome, both personally and professionally, is resilience skills, are all the other skills that would be valuable to any company.
Yeah.
And then I also look forward. I go, okay, what is it that I want to experience next year? Like, I've done this, I've ticked that box, I've had these goals and I've ticked it. So what else is there? Because I think if you don't evolve and grow,
Yeah.
that's how people become stagnant and stuck and dissatisfied and discontented. And that includes in their career, or especially in their career. If you're not growing, if you haven't identified what's your next level or where else do you want to contribute.
Mm,
And sometimes it could be a sideways move
yeah.
rather than an upwards move, right? Um, and the sideways move is not a bad thing. Some people look at it as a bad thing, but sometimes the sideways move is the necessary move before you move up again, right? And so I go through this process. But what I see, Wayne, is that quite a few people are resistant to doing the foundational pieces. And this is where I say to people, If you don't build solid foundations beneath whatever goal you're moving towards, it'll crumble quicker than you can blink. Or you'll end up once again settling. You'll grab a job that you think is the one that you want because you're like, I need something different, I'm bored, or you need more money and I need to change my circumstances. And then 2 years later, you're back in the same. I've had 1 or 2 clients come back because they didn't follow the advice or they didn't complete the whole plan with me, settled for a role. And then 2 years later, they back. I get the phone call. I think I made a mistake or whatever. And I can almost foresee it, but people sometimes have to go on a journey. I never discourage people from going on whatever journey they need to go on to learn. But I can often, because I've been in the game so long, I can see it before it even happens. And so I say to people, get the foundations right, identify what you need to identify about yourself, your skills, what you want to do, plan it out so that you're not willy-nilly applying for 50 jobs that have no meaning to you. Because the thing is, the moment you get to the interview, if you don't have a genuine enthusiasm for that kind of work, it is going to somehow show.
Yep.
You're going to get asked a couple of questions and you're not going to be able to bring the energy that you need to bring. And, most interviewers are seasoned people. They've been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years. You can't pull the wool over their eyes. And so you have to be fairly clear that that is where you want to be, And sometimes you don't have all the skills for the role, but you're the person that has to advocate and go, look, I don't have all of the skills, but these are the transferable skills I have. This is where I'm really strong. And I've always been someone that can learn on the job, advocate for yourself. So I see that often. And I encourage people to not skip the foundation pieces. Do the planning, do the research.
Yeah. It's so critical. I mean, I love listening to what you're saying because it is so, as you say, foundational to setting it up for success. And unfortunately, human nature, I guess, we look for the easy approach, the easy road, and
yes,
more often than not, it doesn't work. And you end up, just as you said, in a role that somebody was just wanting to put somebody into a position. They weren't really concerned about who that person was. They just needed to fill the seat. And within a short time, you realize, gosh, this is not what I like doing. It's not what I want to do.
Yep.
And you're back to square one, just as you mentioned. So great advice, great advice. Hey, let's jump on too, because I love this phrase, silver tsunami. So I thought when you first said it, you were just having a dig at my lovely colored hair, but but I've really gone in and looked at it and considered it myself, and I really like what it all means, and you introduced it when we were first talking as a trend that you're observing with the older workers, the older workforce becoming more attractive again in the market.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could just build on that for us, please.
Okay, so first of all, I'll say that I'm also a silver girl. You can see here by the sides, but I like a bit of color in the hair. So I also fall into the silver tsunami crew. What I'm observing is that EQ skills have become incredibly important in the hiring trends at the moment. And what a lot of employers are recognizing is that those EQ skills are at their best in the older workforce. And that's not to say we believe that younger people can't have the EQ skills.
Right.
The skills that are required to lead people, to collaborate with people, to work through very difficult times. And most projects hit difficult moments.
Yep.
And what they're seeing is that some of the younger generation are coming through and they haven't yet gone through that real lived experience in the professional world. They haven't had the super difficult project where you have to work it from all angles, workshop it from every angle, work with vendors and partners and clients to try and make it work. And so this is what I'm seeing is that suddenly my partner calls them gray hairs. The gray hairs are on the rise, and companies are looking for people with this experience. So people that have got at least 20, 30 years experience in the workforce, which is our generation, the midlife person and beyond.
Yes.
Because they recognize that you don't get that straight out of university. You don't get that straight out of a grad or even someone who's been 10 years in the workforce. That comes with experience. And so it's twofold. One is that they want the experience for the people, the gray hairs, to drive the project. But the other is that they want to start developing their people.
Yes.
Which means the gray hairs become the mentors. They become the people that can teach the younger project managers or business analysts or whatever the title is, how to navigate difficult and challenging times. And this became a lot more prominent after the pandemic because there's all this emotional resilience that had to be handled. You know, people were in isolation for months on end. Here in the state of Victoria, we were the longest locked up city, Melbourne, right? Across the world.
Yeah.
So when people started coming back into the workforce or going back into the office, what they were noticing was that there was a lot of ineffective communication. Some people had challenges even socially with their colleagues. And so all of this is needed. And the ones that bring it are the ones that have already lived it, that have lived through these challenging times, overcome, worked through difficult projects, worked with bosses, gone through restructures and organizational restructures, all of these things. And so that's why the silver tsunami, they call it, is on the rise because the gray hairs are now in demand. Right. And so what I want to do is encourage mid-level people to understand that their value has not diminished. It is in fact on the rise at the moment. This is what I'm seeing, the people I talk to, and I speak to both clients who are helped get hired, but also hiring people who are looking for people.
Right.
This is a trend that's on the rise, and I think it will continue to be on the rise. And also people are retiring later in life. You know, a lot of people are going, well, I'm not ready. I have a lot to still give, you know, and it might be that they don't want to work full throttle at 40 hours a week. They maybe want to work 25 hours a week or 30 hours a week, but their experience is still valuable. And so I think for the mid-level careerist, once you learn to identify those valuable EQ skills, you know, the problem solving, the leadership, the collaboration, the building up of teams, all of these type of things, and you learn to sell that really well, there is plenty of room for you in the workforce, and it will be so for quite some time.
That will be music to the ears of many of our listeners, I'm sure. You actually frame it as a triangle, right? So you have EQ, the resilience, and the experience at each of the tips. And you know, when you look at that and you think, well, how is it that adversity is going to promote my growth as an employee or enable me to work longer? It's almost like they're at opposite ends of the spectrum, and yet somehow they've found a path forward. I think that's really fascinating and interesting to dive into. So if we look back at probably pre you coming to Melbourne, you're in South Africa and you were there during the apartheid period.
Yes.
Yeah, that was an extremely tough period, I think, for anyone in the country, whatever your color of skin. What is it that helped you as an individual develop in terms of resilience, in terms of focus? How did you come out of that?
Well, look, I will say my parents gave us very strong foundations. So obviously, as a child, you don't know that you live in this segregated country. You don't know because you're a kid, you're playing in your neighborhood, you're playing with your friends. You don't know that there's different neighborhoods for blacks, coloreds, whites. You don't know that there's limitations in terms of opportunity. But once I learned about it, I was always a very curious kid, so I was questioning my father. Like, well, how do we go forward? Because I'm classified as Cape colored, which means I had the white grandparents and the black grandparents, so mixed race, biracial. Um, and there were limitations. Only you could only go to school in certain areas. University was so expensive that you knew your parents were never going to be able to afford it. So I got into the University of Cape Town on a scholarship.
Okay.
I had to write an essay. I mean, thank God writing was my thing, right? I loved writing. um, One of the ways I processed that whole environment was actually through writing. So I began journaling at a very young age because I didn't understand what was going on. And sometimes the adults didn't always give me the answers. And maybe it's because it was too painful for mom and dad to give us certain realities. So I would write out things and I started writing poetry and I would just journal and notice that I was able to sort of process, ask questions, then go and research, look at the library books. Back then it wasn't internet, so it was library to find out what was going on in the country. But one of the lessons was my father from a very young age had certain demands of us. And one was that you always gave your best. The other was that living in the harsh circumstances that we lived in was no excuse not to succeed. And he drummed that into us from a very young age, that we had to become the captains of our own ships. And it didn't matter how stormy the waters were around us. You had to move forward, you had to navigate those waters, you had to find a way. And so it was instilled in us from a very young age. And so even though I've been through numerous challenges in South Africa, post South Africa, I lived in the US for a couple of years as well. I always remember that. Dad was like, you can either be a victim of life or you can be a victor of life. You decide.
Mm.
And for him, being a victim wasn't acceptable. So in the end, it wasn't even a choice, right? Because dad was just like, no, I know this is difficult, but there's a way forward. What is the way forward? And so that was instilled in us by both my parents, but more so by my father. And I think it's because my father was orphaned at a very young age, at age 4, and he grew up in an orphanage. So he saw some tough times,
Right.
not having parents and things like that. So dad didn't accept that we just became victims of life. And he put those thoughts into our brains from a young age. And then post that time, I'm not saying I haven't been through hard times and I call it doona diving. I have doona dived where I wanted to hide away from my problems and gone under the doona and cried my eyes out and all of those things. But it never lasted for long because
Mm.
at the back of the mind was always you either victor of your life or you're a victim of life. Decide.
So,
And it
so
was as
powerful.
simple as that.
Yeah.
As simple as that. I've always only been, there's the angel and the devil on the shoulders,
Mm.
that dictates the way forward.
And coming out of that period, of course, was probably, well, I believe, at least in our era, the most powerful, visible, resilient person that I've ever come across, Mandela. Um, Now, I'm not saying he was unique, but at least his story became unique to the world. But I can imagine
Yes.
there are a lot of people went through a similar thing as he did. He just managed to reach, the highest pinnacle as a result of that struggle. But there's listening to the journey that you've been on and the advice that you got from your father, victor or victim. Um, it's really framed that resilience that I can sense in you as an individual. You know, we've only met a couple of times, but I can really see that even just through the camera, that you have that as part of your character trait. Uh, I'm wondering, when you work with your clients, how do you help them become more resilient? How do you encourage them to be able to shift in this direction?
Well, one of the things I always encourage my clients to do is to take it one step at a time. Because what
Mm,
I've seen in life is that sometimes when we go through a huge challenge, we feel like we need to fix everything all at once. And I've never actually seen that work. I see that people become extremely overwhelmed.
mhm.
And so then they take no action at all.
Right.
So for me, my motto and my way of working with people is we take one step at a time. We identify the most important next step. So, for example, if you decide I'm bored in my career, or I hate my career, or my boss hates me and I'm never getting promotions, and so on and so on, then perhaps the first next step is to identify why you want the career change. Because you do need to know what's motivating you,
Yes.
right? We need to always identify. I think Simon Sinek calls it identifying your why. Why do you want to have a career change? Because if you don't have a strong enough motivating factor, you're going to give up at the first sign of challenge. I've seen that over and over. So that's the first step. The second step is, okay, what do I have to offer the world? I want to move into, say, for example, you're a doctor and you want to move into health technology. What's the skills that goes from here to here?
Yes.
Identify that. And the next step would be, okay, how do I frame up these skills so that I can sell myself from year to year? And what help do I need?
Mm,
Because sometimes you can't do it on your own.
yeah.
I did not go where I am now. I spoke to the recruiters, I spoke to the hiring managers, and I also worked with a couple of coaches. Now, what I did was, at the time when I lost the house and I was pregnant and all of those things, I didn't have the money. But what I would do with the coaches is the ones that I found and that I really wanted to work with, I would say to them, what is your fee? And they tell me, and I say, look, I can't afford to do that right now, but how long does this fee hold for? Is it for 6 months? Is it for 12 months? And I would actually get them to commit to keeping that fee at that price for me. And then I would go on my saving spree. So I would work out my budget and I need to put $50 or $100 away a week so that I can afford a coach in 6 months' time.
Mm,
And these are all simple steps. So you identify what needs to be done and then you break it down. And then I would do the commitment to my action steps, whatever the action step is. And for me, in the initial stages, was I had to save X amount every single week. Right? That was the thing. So ticket every week, I've put the $100 away or whatever, and then I can go back and afford the coach. So that's how sometimes you have to break it down as simple as that,
mm,
right? And understand that it's a one step at a time. It's a journey. If you try to take on all the actions that you need to do to have change in your life, you will overwhelm yourself. Your brain will switch off and say, nope, I'm not doing this. This is too much. And then you're stuck. You remain stuck. So for me, the simplest thing I say to people, and is what I do with them when I work with them, is we go one step at a time.
mm.
What's the next step? What's the next best step? And then after that, what's the next one? And after that, what's the next one? What I've seen happen, though, is when people get those little wins, they gain momentum.
Yes.
And when they gain momentum, suddenly they're doing 3 action steps in 1 week, or 4 action steps in 1 week. Or sometimes they're going, oh, I'm doing the career ones, but I also need to manage my health and I need to manage my self-care. And so suddenly they got the self-care and the health and the career, and everything starts to gain momentum, because as you get the wins, you gain momentum. And then the actual journey is quicker with that momentum than it would have been if they hadn't started at all. So
There's a great
it's baby steps. Baby steps is the answer.
there's a great saying by Tony Robbins that says we always over anticipate or overstate what we'll achieve in 12 months and understate
Yes,
what we'll achieve in 10 years. And I personally believe that is because of what you've just explained, is as you start, you have to start small. It takes time to build that momentum. And that's normally that first year while you're building and you're building. But as that momentum builds, then it starts to take off and you underestimate how quickly things will explode after that point. So I like that.
absolutely.
Yeah. I also think your advice really resonates with a lot of people who are struggling at the moment with the reskilling, upskilling terminology and whole environment that they find themselves in as a result of technology and the
Yes.
changes. And people feel overwhelmed. I
Yeah.
at 60 years of age, starting a new career where I've got to be more technologically advanced, gosh, where would I start? How would I start?
Yeah.
You need to be able to break it down step by step to build that awareness, build that momentum. So I think that advice is so sound and very, very apt for where we are in society and the world at the moment. So thank you for sharing that. I want to get into the actual interview process a little bit.
Yeah.
But before we do that, you've got to be able to get to the interview. So
Yes.
normally it starts with the preparation we've already mentioned about, being intentional, understanding what you want to do, but then you've got to write the resume. Now, I know this
Yep.
is one of your fortes. So what does a compelling resume look like in 2024, 2025?
Okay, so a compelling resume is a resume that's number one, not too long. So I have seen 10-page resumes, 5-page resumes, and here's where I think a lot of mid-level people make the mistake. They think they have to share every detail of every job they've ever held since they left high school, right? But when you do that, there's the first thing that's happening is that you're not showing awareness of the busy hiring person.
Yes.
So these people get 100 to 200 applications for one job. So if you're the person that's going to send them a 10-page resume or a 5-page resume, you're already demonstrating that you're not aware of how busy they are. So that's not going to count in your favor.
Mm.
These days, the first thing that happens with a lot of resumes, they go through the gatekeepers, the ATSs.
Yeah.
So you need to write them for that, right? So one of the clues to writing a good resume that's going to pass through that first gatekeeper, which is the application tracking system, is to look at and study the job description. All the important keywords that you need is in that job description.
Mm.
Use it, weave it throughout your resume.
Right.
But make your resume compelling in terms of use active language,
Yes.
right? Language that's pacey and active, and that use bullet points. So it's easy to read. The information is easy to scan and easy to absorb. And then, as I said, be mindful of who your audience is. Your audience is a busy hiring person.
Yep.
So keep the resume tight. These days, they want to see your last 10 years. So detail around your most recent 10 years. Anything that's before that, you can put as a one-liner summary. So you could say, from 2000 to 2008, I worked at IBM. So you just put IBM and what was the role title. And if you held more than one role title in those 8 years, then you just put held these 4 roles and just put the name. That's it. That's enough. Nobody cares about the rest of it. Why? Because it's over 10 years old.
Yeah.
Because technology has emerged significantly since then. Procedures have changed significantly since then. So people just want to see that you have continuity of employment. That's why you put your summary roles, but you zone in on your last 10 years. And that needs to be about what you achieved. The achievements becomes the most significant things. Now, I see the reverse. I see people with long lists of tasks and responsibilities. Boring. Okay.
Yep.
Hiring people hate that. They already know what a project manager does. They know what a change manager does. They know what a CEO does. Go to the achievements. Give a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what you did in that role, and then zone in on the achievements. Choose your top 6 or your top 7. If you've been in a role for, say, 5 years or longer, then 6 really strong achievements is great on a resume. Anything less than 5 years, 3 strong achievements. And the way you write the achievement, there's a framework called the CAR framework. Challenge, action, result. What was the challenge? What were the couple of action steps I took? And what was the result? And if you can back up your result with some metrics, some numbers. For example, if you had a challenge of walking into a team that was struggling, you took these 3 action steps, and the result was a 30% increase in productivity of the team. That's a great achievement. And if you learn to write your achievements in this CAR framework, it's going to be sharp, it's going to be succinct, and it's going to be compelling. And that's the kind of resume that gets someone going, I need to interview this person.
Right.
Right? I've seen the opposite. I see people give this long War and Peace story about the tasks that they do and the responsibilities. Nobody cares. They already know what that role does. They want to see how you've achieved in the role. You need to demonstrate how you've contributed, because that's the evidence that the interviewer or the hiring person has and says, aha, here's the evidence that they did this at that company, they can do it here.
Yep.
Right? So always put yourself in the mind of the interviewer and write for that person. Don't write for yourself. This is not about you sharing your whole long story and all about you. It is always about addressing the selection criteria of that hiring person.
I'm feeling a little bit guilty here because you're sharing so many fantastic tips. I mean, for our listeners, if you were working with Wendy as your coach, you would be paying her for this advice right now. This is golden advice, I have to say. What about how you can leverage the social platforms, in particular LinkedIn, I guess, is the #1 platform used by recruiters today. What is it on LinkedIn that we really need to focus on?
Okay, so LinkedIn is it's your brand. This is where you're going to brand yourself as a great candidate for whatever role you want to go. So you need to pay attention to a couple of things. One of the pieces of advice I give to people is remove that boring LinkedIn banner, right? You know, there's a banner at the back that's got that little blue color and that little
Yes.
2 white lines.
Yes.
That doesn't say anything about you.
Mm.
So don't let that LinkedIn default banner sell you. Sell yourself a different way. And sometimes people go, oh, but I don't know what to put up there. Well, nature pictures always work well. People love nature pictures. I've had a number of clients who put beautiful pictures of, like, if they have a favorite place they like to go to, New Zealand, for example, they've got beautiful pictures of mountains in New Zealand, whatever. Have something that represents something about you, whether it's something about your work or something about a hobby or something that you're interested in doing. If you're a traveler, then a great travel banner is fantastic to have, because the moment the person comes to it, people are caught by the banner. If it's the LinkedIn banner, they tend to not be surprised. There's nothing inspiring. There's nothing eye-catching about it. So everything you do on LinkedIn is about drawing people to you. They need to know what you stand for, what you're interested in. Profile picture, front on. Make sure the eyes, like a lot of people have pictures with their animals. This is the one time you don't have the animals. Nobody should be on that picture but you. And of your face, only a smile, because and make sure people can see your eyes. People trust eyes, windows of the soul.
Right.
Right? So strong. And then headlines. So a lot of people use their title as a headline. So they'll go project manager. Okay. What's inspiring about that? So I'm a copywriter as well, which is why, so I'm giving advice from the copywriting perspective. So copywriting is, there's a saying in copywriting, facts tell, but stories sell.
Yeah.
So even in your headline, LinkedIn gives you 220 characters for a reason. They want you to say something about who you are, who you help, and how you help. Right? And so instead of writing project manager as a title, you could write something about experienced PM what do you do? Who delivers projects on time and within budget and is welcome back on projects, right?
Mm.
Or you can say who has delivered multi-million-dollar projects on time within budget, leveling up high-performing teams, something like that. Because now the person knows how you do it and the scope of the work that you've done. If you mentioned that you've delivered $200 million projects, that's huge, right? And so I say to people, get a little bit more interesting with your titles, with your headline, because that makes people want to read on. And then the other thing is the first 3 lines of your about section is what is seen before you have to click on that little more before you get to read. Make that count.
Right.
Use a great quote that potentially just, stands for some of your values. Or, introduce yourself as to where did this start? This started for me playing around with a television set, if you're an engineer. I'm the kid that played around with a television set and was always fiddling around trying to fix things up. And this is what led me on the journey to engineering. That is an interesting little start to your about section. Many people just put a list of all the tasks they do, and then they go back to, project manager and all the tasks. There's nothing compelling about that. Tell a story when you're doing your about section. You get 2,600 characters. They give it to you for a reason. LinkedIn wants you to be compelling, wants you to tell a story, wants you to brand yourself. And look, if you struggle with those things, not everybody is a wordsmith. Not everybody is comfort. Some people are numbers people. If you give them maths, if you gave me maths and numbers, I'd cry in a corner. It's not my forte, right? But other people are great at that, but they're not as good. Then that's when you start getting a writer, a resume writer, or a LinkedIn profile writer to help you, because it is worth investing some time and money into getting that right. Because everybody goes there now. In fact, some companies go past recruiters and go directly to LinkedIn because they're cutting out the middleman. They want to find the great candidates directly on LinkedIn. And so many hiring people bypass even recruiters and go directly to LinkedIn. So you need to stand out there. You need to tell people who you are, who you help, and also share something quirky about yourself. So if you're someone who likes flying airplanes, I always say to people at the end of your about section, just use, 1 sentence or 2 sentences to share something personal about yourself. So people don't see you as a professional robot.
Right.
You need to not come across as a professional robot. You need to come across as someone with human interests. If you happen to be one of my clients, he was struggling with confidence, and so he took up singing lessons. That is in his LinkedIn profile, that he does singing lessons to help him build confidence. And he says every single time he's had an interview, he gets asked about that.
I bet.
It's a conversation starter. It's a way to connect in a different way. All of these things matter.
Fantastic. And of course, in many roles today, sales is a classic example. So much selling is done through social media today that if you don't have these strong profiles, if you don't have this presence in your posting, then you're probably going to be overlooked in many cases, because companies are looking for people who are active, as opposed to when you and I were growing up.
Correct. Absolutely.
Right. So it plays so many parallel roles and so important in many aspects. So that's the resume, that's social media, if you like, a little bit. Then we come to the preparation for the interview. What's some simple advice you could offer in how to prepare effectively?
Okay, so here's where I think some people can learn how to do their resumes and their LinkedIn themselves, but I think the interview is the decider, right? If you don't perform in an interview, you don't get the job offer.
Yes.
And so if you're going to invest money, here's the place to invest money, with a coach. I also encourage people to practice with a family member, with a colleague, but you're not going to get the feedback that you need necessarily from a family member or even a colleague, right? And so if you want to really be strong in your interviews, then it's probably worth investing with a coach, because that's where you're going to get the real feedback.
Yeah.
When I work with my clients, we go through each question. I let them speak. The first session, I let them give me the answers. And then I start to give them feedback. And it's like, first of all, you spoke too long. Interviews, 2 minutes for each answer is enough. If you're going beyond 2.5, 3 minutes, you're talking too long.
Mm.
And here's a couple of ways you are stacking the deck against you. Because an interviewer will have his 10, 12, 15 questions prepared. There's a reason they prepare their questions a certain way. They want to, first of all, see if you've got some of the skills for the role. But most important, they want to see if you're a culture fit. If you take up so much time answering the first few questions,
right,
and they don't get to the latter questions, now they haven't decided. They can't clearly see if you are the right culture fit. So your chances of getting that role is slim, especially now, because as I've said in the previous answers, EQ skills matter, and they're going to be wanting to ask you for specifics and examples around your EQ skills. But if you've dominated the interview with 5-minute answers, they're not going to get to those last few questions.
Yes.
And so you need to be the person that has practiced your answers so well. You have your scenarios. And I say to people, prepare 6 to 10 different scenarios, and prepare scenarios that can go across multiple questions. That means you don't have to remember so many scenarios. You remember your core ones and you adapt them as the questions come at you. You only get better at that with practice. And so when I work with people, it's 3 sessions before we see if they're ready. Like, one session isn't going to do it, because the first session, I'm determining just how good you are at answering your questions. I'm giving you feedback. You spoke too long. Hang on a minute. You've got these great skills and this great things in your resume, but you haven't mentioned it at all in your, because you need to remember the interviewer is also looking at your resume while they're asking you these questions. So everything has to flow. Everything has to connect. The resume, the LinkedIn, they all have to connect to how you present in the interview. And so it is the spot where you need a lot of practice. I've not seen many, even the most confident people have become unraveled in interviews, because all you need is one curveball question and people panic, the brain freezes, and all of that. And so I do multiple various scenarios with people. I ask them, the most common interview questions from a behavioral standpoint. But I also get people, if they come to me and say, Wendy, I need help with interview practice, I get them to send me the job description. And I also prepare job-specific questions from that role so that they're ready. Because I say to them, I can help write your resume and do your LinkedIn because I'm a wordsmith. I can do that easily. But I don't get to walk into the interview with you. You walk in there alone. That means you need to be prepared.
Yes.
Don't underestimate the preparation that's required to really stand out in an interview. Obviously, research is the other thing. Know the company mission. I even encourage my clients to know the company socials, because I'm like, they could have posted. I always say to my clients, before you go into an interview, if you've got an interview midday or 10 o'clock, that morning, have a quick look at their socials, see what they've posted, because maybe they have a project that's around social enterprise and they very focus on that. Find a way to weave that into the answer. I noticed this morning on your social media that you posted about you doing the social enterprise exercise. Do you know how impressive that is to an interview that you've actually read that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I also encourage people to try and understand what the environment that they're going to walk into, whether it's an office environment and you're going to have 2 people or you're going to have 5 people. I have a personal horror story myself when I was midway through my career, and I was going for quite a high level role for a country level position. And I walked into the interview and there was 12 people at the table, and every one of them were asking questions. And
Yes.
I I self-imploded. I wasn't prepared as much as I was super confident, understood the topic, knew what I was there for. I just didn't foresee that pressure cooker environment. So I
Yes.
think, there's so much to learn in preparing for an interview. And I love your advice about engaging with a coach, because I think as much as we can prepare ourselves, we can't envisage everything. And that's what the coach
No.
really helps with. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think the feedback that you get from a coach, if they're a good coach, they're going to give you honest feedback. They're not going to tell you what you want to hear. Their job is to prepare you thoroughly. That means if your answer has gone on too long, they need to be giving you feedback and helping you draw the answer back, make it tighter. If the answer was totally off the beaten track, this is the question. Because here's another thing I've seen where people don't listen to the question fully. So the interview asks them a question, they listen to the top part of the question, they start answering the question, there's a tail end to the question, and they have completely missed it. And so one of the other things I encourage my clients to do is to always listen. I
Right.
said, and if you don't understand the question, clarify it. Pause and say, so what I'm hearing you say or what I'm hearing you ask, and put it back to them. Make sure that you're answering the question they've actually asked,
Yes.
because that is one thing that's going to count against you if you start rabbiting off an answer, but you haven't heard the tail end of the question.
Yeah.
So always pause. There's so many scenarios that we need to practice when you do interviews, but it is worth getting them right, because that is what's going to land you the job,
Yeah.
right? If you don't perform in an interview, you're not getting the job offer.
Yes. And unfortunately, so many suitable candidates don't get the job because they don't perform in the interview.
That's right.
And it's such a shame. We're
Yes.
so far out of time. I'm really sorry. There's so many questions I would love to talk about. Do you have any final tips for people looking to transition in their career? One or two tips that you could leave with them to take away from our conversation?
Well, the first tip is to do the foundational work. I know that for some people it's boring and they can't be bothered and they want to get quickly to the next change in their life.
Yeah.
But change without preparation, I've rarely seen it work. In fact, I shouldn't even say rarely, I've never seen it work.
Right.
I've seen people come back a couple of years later, dissatisfied, more depressed even than they were 2 years earlier. Probably because they realized that they haven't prepared properly, that they didn't really do what they needed to do to identify where they really wanted to go.
Mm.
And here's the other piece of advice. You spend a good portion of your day in your working environment. You may as well be happy.
Yeah.
There's going to be moments where there's challenges. Nothing in life comes without a challenge. However, you want to be as happy as you can be. So choose wisely and take the time to figure out what it is that you want to do. And then the other tip is self-care, very important. Many people forget that alongside all change that we want to make, we also need to be taking care of ourselves, and sometimes a walk in nature, going for some pampering, massage, whatever it is, make sure that you're taking care of yourself, especially when you're going through big changes.
Mm.
You need that physical health, you need that mental health, you need that emotional health. All of those are very important, because when you finally get to the interview stage, you have to bring the energy. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you aren't going to be able. People think they can fake it through an interview, but interviewers are too experienced now.
Yep.
They've done this for 20, 30 years, a lot of them, and they know energy, good energy, and they know upbeat energy and confident energy when they see it.
Yes.
And a lot of them, even if you're sort of able to fake your way through it in the first part of an interview, I've seen that's when they throw a curveball question at you, just to see how you can pivot, how you think on your feet, all of those things.
Yeah.
So self-care is really important.
Thank you for that excellent advice. Wendy, I know you've got a book.
Yes.
What's the book title?
So the book title is Internal Uprising, and that's mostly written for the midlife woman who is wanting to make change and is going through physical, menopausal, and all of that midlife change. So it's about that journey. I went on a very difficult journey. I'm quite authentic in the book about my journey, but also how it led to me then choosing my business full time and leaving corporate.
Hmm. Sounds like a great story. I'm definitely out there buying it. Where can I get it? Amazon or?
Amazon, yes, I would just do a search in Amazon, Internal Uprising and Wendy Alexander. So put those four words in the search and the book will come up straight away.
Perfect. And people listening, where can they connect with you if they want to hire you as a coach or find out more about the great work you're doing?
So I'm on LinkedIn. Wendy A. Alexander is the handle. I couldn't get Wendy Alexander. Someone else had it. So I had to put my initial in there. So it's Wendy A. So there's two A's in the middle, Alexander. And then happycareerhub.com is my website. And that's probably the best way to connect with me.
All right, perfect. Well, Wendy, fantastic conversation. We've scratched the surface of what we could have spoken about. I have 1,000 other topics I want to talk about, but anyway, maybe another time. But
Yes.
thank you so much for being a guest on the ET Project. Really enjoyed the conversation and all the best for Christmas. This will air after Christmas. So for those
Yes.
listening, we recorded before Christmas. So all the best. Hopefully you're
Thank you, and wonderful to be here. Thank you.
So what are you waiting for? Hit the subscribe button below and click on the bell icon so I can pop up in your feed occasionally with a great tip for your ultimate growth.